I was on Amazon.com looking for some mindfulness meditation reading, and somehow I came across this book called Positive Intelligence, written by Stanford Professor Chamine. And it was an absolutely fascinating book because it talked about what we could do to impact our emotional intelligence, and also what are the limiting factors in our career. So without much further ado, I'd like to pass it over to Professor Chamine.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to be here at Google because I don't know if you know it, but you have changed my life. Google has changed my life. My research on my book and my book would be less than a third done if it weren't for you guys. So you have changed my life, and I'm here to reciprocate. And if you allow me to, I will. And I'd like to start in terms of what the topic of this work is, with a quote that I consider heartbreaking because on the one hand it's so tragic, and on the other it's so true. Most men lead lives of quiet desperation and go to the grave with the song still in them. Thoreau wrote this quote about 150 years ago, and despite the tremendous progress that we have made in science and technology and all sorts of other things, sadly, I think this quote is just as true today as it was 150 years ago. The only thing we need to change about this quote is now he would say most men and women lead lives of quiet desperation and go to the grave with the song still in them. So what this quote is about, which is two areas that I'm passionate about, are two dimensions. And the two dimensions, the first one is the dimension of happiness, what he calls quiet desperation. Now you may be looking around saying, gee, I'm not quietly desperate. Maybe my neighbor is, the guy sitting next to my left or right, but I'm not quietly desperate. But actually you are. Let me tell you how you're quietly desperate. So the modern version of this quiet desperation that too many of us are leading, it's what I would call things such as, and see if that resonates for you, constant stress, constant anxiety, constantly wondering if you're good enough, if you have done enough, if your career is progressing well, if what tomorrow will bring, constantly disappointed with the performance you have done or the performance that others have done. So I take this collective category of what I call negative emotions, and I call that category general unhappiness. And what I would like to say is that based on my research, we are just as unhappy today as we were 150 years ago. Its manifestation has changed. That's one dimension I'm very passionate about changing. The second dimension that this quote talks about is going to our grave with the song still in us. What that dimension is about performance, is about achievement. Not any achievement or performance, but meaningful achievement and performance. Because I believe every single one of us is born with a unique, beautiful song in us. And most of us go to our graves not knowing how to manifest it and how to bring it out. That's about achieving the highest possibility of your achievement, reaching your true potential for the difference you can make in the world, for the performance that you're capable of and what it is that you can contribute. So my work is about how can we have you be significantly happier and also significantly more capable in achieving your true potential. The reason that, now as you can imagine, you guys are working really hard. You probably have read tons of books. There have been hundreds of books written since Thoreau wrote that quote about increasing your happiness and increasing your effectiveness. So how come we haven't made that much progress in changing that over 150 years? And how come when you have tried to become significantly happier or significantly more effective using tools, technologies, books that you have read, how come the results have been incremental and have fizzled after a while, not dramatic the way that we want it to be dramatic? And I just like to use an example and tell you why. And the example is, imagine that there is this guy who lives in a village, and he has his greatest possession, his sole source of livelihood is this huge tree that he has in his garden. And this tree has hundreds of leaves, and these leaves are his source of livelihood. As he sells them, they need to be big and strong and healthy. And imagine that this guy wakes up every morning and drags himself drudgingly to the base of this huge tree, looks up, and with great disappointment notices that there are lots of leaves today that are looking wilted and looking dehydrated. And what he does day after day is he painstakingly climbs this very huge tree and gets to reach these very hard to reach branches, and painstakingly takes one leaf after the other and polishes it and sprays it with water so that it's less wilted and less dehydrated. And leaf after leaf after leaf until every minute of the day is over, until every spray of water that he has, every drop of water is gone, and until every ounce of energy is exhausted. It's the end of the day, and the next day he's going to start down the same routine. Now, you and I know, we look at him and you say, you know what? And as we notice the crazy fact that he never gets to water the roots of this tree. He's busy going up there and dealing with the leaves. And the reason is he's left with no time and no water at the end of the day to water the roots of the tree. You and I look at that and say, this guy is kind of cuckoo. He's a little insane. Why doesn't he just water the roots of the tree? We feel kind of superior thinking that, right? We are much smarter than that guy. But I hope you won't take it personally. But I do believe that that's exactly what you do day in and day out. And that the reason that we still live lives of quiet desperation after so many years is that our attempts at improving our happiness on the one hand and improving our performance on the other hand are very analogous to us dealing at the leaves level. We are busy polishing the leaves and spraying them with water, and we have forgotten, and we actually never learned, and we don't know how to water the roots. And I'm here to tell you that you can actually find a way to, if you focus on what the roots are, that you can find a way to be dramatically more effective in what you do and dramatically happier and have time to actually lay under the tree and enjoy the shade too. And that's how I believe that this technology that I bring, positive intelligence, can actually change your life and have me pay my dues back to Google because you have done the same for me. Now the interesting thing is that in the past 15 years or so in particular, there have been powerful pieces of research in 4 different areas of discipline that have given us really wonderful clues about what is at the root level. What is at this common root level for what creates dramatic improvements in happiness and at the same time dramatic improvement in performance? There have been 4 areas of science and research that have had powerful insights to that. So I'd like to tell you what those 4 areas are, and then from that figure out, kind of put these pieces of the puzzle together about what is the root level and how do we make sure that we tend to the root level. And the first thing is the area of positive psychology. And in positive psychology, my colleagues have contributed a very huge part of this puzzle of what the root is. And one of the biggest insights of positive psychology is that after centuries of thinking that the way you can get to be happier is by performing and achieving higher. Perform and achieve higher so that you can be happier. Positive psychology has turned it on its head and shown that actually higher achievement and performance does not lead to higher happiness, but higher happiness does lead to higher performance and achievement. A happier brain is a much more capable, much more resourceful, much more creative brain. So that's a huge contribution that positive psychology has made to this puzzle of what's at the root. The other contribution is that actually 90% of the variation in people's happiness from one person to another is explainable based on what is happening inside of their own head, not based on what's happening in their life in terms of wealth and possessions or any of that stuff. Those are huge contributions to the puzzle of what's at the root. The other very important discipline that has given us great new insights about this, about what's at the root, is neuroscience. And what we know with neuroscience is a few very exciting things. With functional MRI, what neuroscience has shown us is what areas of the brain, if they are stimulated, can actually have you feel all these positive, wonderful feelings that collectively create happiness. So there are areas of the brain that if you stimulate them, if you learn how to activate them, you will be feeling much happier, much more positive feelings, regardless of what kind of situation you're dealing with. And the second contribution is that the brain is like a muscle, and that with some simple little exercises, you can actually develop the muscle of command over your own mind so that you can command which part of your brain can be activated and which part of your brain will be quieted down. And that's a very powerful contribution to this puzzle of what's at the root of happiness and higher performance. And that there are areas of the brain that will get you not just higher performance, but also higher happiness if you're able to activate them. The third area of very exciting work in the past 15 years plus is in cognitive behavioral psychology. What we know is kind of a little bit of the psychological corollary of what I shared about neuroscience a minute ago. The psychological corollary is that in most people's mind, there are some really dysfunctional habits of the mind, automatic habits of the mind, that create a lot of not only your unhappiness, but your problems with highest achievement. They get in the way of you performing at the highest level. There are just these automatic habits of the mind that gets triggered, and we go on automatic drive, and they don't serve us. And very excitingly, what cognitive behavioral psychology has shown us is there are some relatively simple ways to actually reprogram the mind to replace some of these dysfunctional old habits with much more positive habits that have you be not only a lot happier, but also a lot more effective. And the final piece of this, the puzzle, that's an exciting contribution to this is the area of performance science. And in particular, about 15 years ago, we had emotional intelligence. Daniel Goldman and his colleagues made a huge contribution to us beginning to understand that actually when it comes to especially professional achievement, the highest achievement, the highest performance that you can get actually comes from having high emotional intelligence competencies that are in the soft skill domain rather than hard skill and IQ. So for the highest level of achievement, especially in a lot of professional fields, the soft skills are what ultimately make the difference rather than either your IQ or the harder skills. And that has been a huge contribution to this puzzle. So what I am here to show you is that, so this is all exciting, and there is one problem with it. The problem is that it can be pretty overwhelming to figure out how to connect all the dots between these things, and actually, so what in the world do you do differently tomorrow based on all this insight? One of the CEOs that I was coaching was telling me that, you know, he has read 5 books on neuroscience. He's so excited that he can tell you exactly what part of the brain gets excited and lit up when he does what, but he has no idea when he is sitting tomorrow in a meeting with his staff and there's conflict in his staff. What the heck do I do differently now? How do I go from my understanding of the brain to what do I do differently when 2 of my team members are always fighting with each other? How do you connect the dots between all of this beautiful, wonderful scientific research to what's actionable? And so basically that's where my contribution comes in the construct of positive intelligence. So what positive intelligence is, sitting on these 4 powerful cornerstones of science, what positive intelligence does, it creates a unified framework that brings in the best of these fields, but very, very importantly does what it is that you need to do at the root level. At the root level, things need to be simple, things need to be actionable, and things need to be measurable. So how do we make things really simple? Because the root is simple. The promise of the root is if you water the roots, lots of awesome things happen on their own. How can we make sure that it's a simple framework, it's an actionable framework so that I can tell you what to do differently tomorrow when you're sitting in a meeting and things are not going well. And it needs to be measurable. How do we make sure it's actually working? And those are the things that positive psychology, with the original research of positive psychology, we add to this. And basically, it is about going to the very core, the root, the common root of what creates your optimal happiness and what creates your optimal performance. And the way that it works with positive intelligence, the definition of positive intelligence is that basically at the core, at the root level, the most important thing for you to pay attention to is the war that's constantly raging inside of your own brain. Inside every human being's brain, there is a war every minute of every day raging between 2 different voices in the mind. One is the voice that serves you, the other is the voice that sabotages you. And positive intelligence is defined as the percentage of time that your mind is serving you as opposed to sabotaging you. The percentage of time that your mind is serving you as opposed to sabotaging you. The premise being that every single one of you, I just met you, right? You're wonderful Google people. But I know that you are busy self-sabotaging yourself all the time. How do I know that? Because I am yet to meet a human being who doesn't have a level of self-sabotage. It is just impossible. And so the question is, how often do you self-sabotage? And what's the amount of time that you self-sabotage versus you serve yourself? And with positive intelligence, we actually put frameworks to this that makes it more understandable. So basically, the voices that are sabotaging you, we call the saboteurs. And the voice that serves you, we call the sage. So the sage is really your true voice, is the voice you can trust. It's the voice you were born with. It's your unique voice. And the saboteurs are things that get into your head sometime in your childhood. I'll get into more detail about where the heck do these saboteurs come from. How come they're so universal? They have, by the way, names like the judge, controller, stickler, and victim. Does any of that remind anybody of anybody that you know? Of course, not yourself, right? You are the one. By the way, if my wife is in the audience, I always tell them, everybody has lots of saboteurs, but my wife is this unique miracle where absolutely, it's just the one exception to the rule. But since she's not here, I can tell you she has her saboteurs too. And so do every one of you. By the way, there are 10 saboteurs altogether. These are the 4. And one of the things that's measurable about positive intelligence is that we can actually measure the strength of your saboteurs. We can also measure the relative strength of your saboteurs versus the sage. And at the root level of your greatest happiness and your greatest performance is this balance of power. And it's a balance of power that's never completely here and never completely there. There's nobody who is 100 in PQ, in positive intelligence, nobody who's a 0. The question is, how do you shift the scale? And as you do, dramatic improvements happen. This is the psychological way of describing what's at the root, but there's, this correlates completely one-on-one with the neurological explanation also of what's happening at the root level of your mind. And at the neurological level, you really are of 2 brains. You have the survival brain region, and you have the positive intelligence brain. And basically what the saboteurs are, they are the agents of your survival brain. And what the sage is, it's the agent of your positive intelligence brain. These are entirely different regions of your brain. Entirely different regions of your brain. So now this is a slight generalization. My book goes into a lot more detailed specifics, but just to give you an idea, the survival brain region is made up mostly of your brainstem, limbic system, and parts of the left brain. The positive intelligence brain is made up mostly of the middle prefrontal cortex, the ACC, insular cortex, and parts of the right brain. They are neurochemically wired differently so that when they are activated, they produce completely different emotions and energy. So the survival brain's job is survive. And that's the reason that everybody has a very active level of survival brain, because from an evolutionary perspective, that has been important to your survival. Now notice the emotions that get generated by the saboteurs and the survival brain. These are the emotions that generate the quiet desperation, the unhappiness, all the stress and difficulty. It's collectively what I call unhappiness. So when I talk about happiness versus unhappiness, I'm asking the question, are you primarily here or are you primarily here? And happiness, becoming happier is about spending more time here and less time here. Again, you can never be completely here, but you can definitely move a lot farther that way. Now notice immediately some things become very clear. I can make some dramatic generalizations. Basically, one of the most important things I can say is your unhappiness has nothing to do with what's happening in your life. It doesn't have to do with the fact that you have a bad boss. By the way, I have heard there are no bad bosses in Google, but just theoretically speaking, it doesn't have to do with that. It doesn't have to do with the fact that you just failed in your job. It doesn't have to do with the fact that you just lost a client. Those are events that are happening in your life. And what I will show you is that if the way you respond to those events is by activating your positive intelligence brain, you can absolutely be dealing with all of the challenges of your work or life while not feeling any of those unhappy feelings. And that basically your unhappiness comes from the fact that you are not in command of your mind. You get sabotaged, you get hijacked by this region of the brain. Why do we get hijacked so often by this region of the brain? Think about it. All those negative energies, the anxiety and fear and paranoia and those kinds of things. Think about thousands of years ago, our ancestors in the jungle. Imagine the one that was very anxious and very negative and assumed the worst. If the tree was starting to shake and the leaves started to shake and our distant ancestors started thinking some animal is going to emerge from behind the tree, the one who was really negatively biased, the one who was running anxious, the one who had low positive intelligence, who assumed, I don't know enough here, but I guarantee you it's going to be a hungry tiger coming to eat me alive. That one bolted before anything happened. That one actually survived. 99 times out of 100, he or she was wrong, but the one time he or she was right, it saved their life. They end up being our ancestors. But imagine if we had theoretically this very optimistic kind of a distant ancestor, and the tree started shaking, and she or he said, you know, I have a good feeling about things today. You know, I'm just feeling very optimistic. I think a panda bear is going to emerge from the tree and give me a big bear hug or something like that. How long do you think that ancestor actually survived? So the predisposition to negativity was something that was helpful for survival. That part of the brain kind of got developed because of it. We all have that. The problem is, as you can notice, by the way, that these things kind of cascade on each other. Stress is the fuel of this brain. And once this thing gets going, it loops on itself. When you're under high stress, which a lot of you are, it begins to fuel all of these cascade of emotions up there. You're more disappointed with yourself. You're more disappointed with others. You are more anxious about what's going to come next. All of these things that come with the saboteurs end up happening. And the counterpart, by the way, is something that is helpful for performance. So we're talking about happiness, but also performance, because what I'm going to show you later is that this region of the brain is really good. It's a specialist for figuring out what's wrong. It's a specialist for seeing the tiger where there is a tiger. But it also sees tigers in a lot of places there are no tigers. It's really good at picking up what's wrong and what's a problem. The problem is that it's not really good for creativity. It's not really good for resourcefulness. It's not good for seeing out of the box. It's the brain. We know that physically when you go to this mode, you get tunnel visioned. But what we are now also discovering that mentally, intellectually, you get tunnel vision when you go to that brain. So most of us are living far more tunnel vision than we need to. We do not see the easy way out, easy answer out, because we're stuck in the wrong kind of brain, wrong part of the brain. And I'll give you a lot more examples of this. Right now, I know it's a little conceptual, but I'm going to give you a lot of examples in real life. How does this happen, and why does this end up being the root of both higher performance and higher happiness? One of the things, by the way, is that as you look at it, you can either talk about being in survival brain or saboteur mode, or talk about positive intelligence or SAGE. It doesn't matter, because one is at the psychological level, the other is the parallel on the neurological level. So one of the things that I want to show you now about how we measure this is that, like I said before, to be at the root level, we need to make sure things are simple and also measurable. So the way we measure this, positive intelligence quotient, or PQ, is the percentage of time you are in SAGE mode versus your saboteur mode. And we can actually measure it based on the amount of time you spend in different kinds of emotions, because as you can see from the previous slide, the emotions are a telltale sign of which part of your brain is activated. So we can begin to measure what that is, and therefore really help you figure out how you're going to be improving this, and if you're about to improve this. And by the way, the final thing I want to say about this, before actually trying to make this a lot more concrete for yourself, is what we have done now is connect this idea of positive intelligence, the PQ, with a lot of different researchers, a lot of my colleagues in the field. There's a whole plethora of connections that are made between this idea of what's the level of positive intelligence in you and what you're going to do in terms of both performance and happiness. Some of them are pretty intuitive. I mean, for example, sales, this is very hot with salespeople. Just imagine the difference between a salesperson who once he gets a rejection or she gets a rejection at 10 a.m., it takes that person 2 hours to recover from being angry and upset and self-doubt and stress and all that stuff before they will be able to pick up the phone and have clean energy in making the next phone call, versus somebody who is going to be able to shake off those feelings in 2 minutes. What difference do you think is going to make in terms of their performance? How quickly you recover from negative emotions to positive? And that's one final point I want to make about this, is that the question that might be raised is there any room for these negative feelings? Is there any room for feeling angry, feeling anxious, feeling upset, feeling disappointed? And the answer is yes, but say about 5% is useful. The rest of it is not. And to give you an example of why and how, think about your physical body. Do you think it's useful for you to feel pain at a physical level? Absolutely. If you did not feel physical pain, you would go to a kitchen when the stove is left on, you would put your hand on the oven. Because you don't feel pain, you will burn your hand to the bone. Therefore, you need to feel pain. But when you go and put your hand on the hot oven and feel pain, what do? You take off your hand. How long do you feel the pain before you get the message? You get the message in 1/10 of a second. The equivalent of that in our work and life is, okay, a failure has happened in the middle of your project. You have made a really bad mistake. You have just lost a client or something important like that. Is it good to feel angry, disappointed, any of these feelings? Absolutely. Because otherwise you'd not be paying attention to anything. There would be no consequences. But how long is it helpful for you to stay in those modes? For 10 seconds, for a minute, for 2 minutes. Before you find a way to say, okay, wake up call, there has been a mistake or failure, what do I do now? And the part of your brain that's going to help you figure out what to do now is this part of the brain. This is good for a wake-up call. This is good for actually figuring out what the heck to do. The problem with most of us is we keep looping in this part of the brain because we remain upset and disappointed and anxious and all that stuff. So yes, there is value to them, but not for long. By the way, a final thing I want to say is, I promise it's the final thing. I keep saying final things. You see something there called 10 years, you live 10 years longer if you have high positive intelligence. This is new science, so I know some of you are skeptical and say, where the heck is this number coming from? I won't tell you, okay? You need to go read the book. There's a really fun story about how come we know that people with high positive intelligence actually live 10 years longer. It shouldn't be a surprise to you, because think about it. The neurochemicals that the survival brain produces are neurochemicals like cortisol, stress hormone, coursing through your body. These days it's 24/7. Those things were intended to get activated once every 5 days when there's an actual tiger in the jungle. Not 24/7. Your body is not supposed to be running on stress all the time. The fact that you live 10 years shorter if you have survival brain activated all the time versus the positive intelligence brain where the chemicals are endorphins, all the cool things that make you feel high. If you live life being high without resorting to external drugs, you live 10 years longer. And I'm here to show you how to turn on this cool manufacturing facility in your own brain to make really cool chemicals that have you feel high and live longer and have higher performance. Okay, so now to get more specific in terms of how do we do this, going back to one, we want things to be measurable. We are at the root level of what's happening, what's impacting your performance and happiness, it needs to be simple, needs to be measurable, and it needs to be actionable. So please hold me accountable to those three things. There are 3 strategies for how to increase your positive intelligence. And please pay attention to whether you believe they are simple, actionable, and measurable. The first strategy is, hey, weaken your saboteurs. If your positive intelligence is the relative strength of your saboteurs versus sage, then obviously weakening your saboteurs, weakening the bad guys, is one way to increase your positive intelligence. Now, as you know, I'm into research. I lecture on this topic at Stanford. By the way, I recognize some of the faces from my Stanford lectures on positive intelligence. It's good to see there are repeat customers. I'm very happy. It's a good sign. I'm really happy to see you guys. So I love research, but I also once in a while believe in a picture is worth more than 1,000 words. So to tell you about saboteurs, let me use a picture, not numbers now. What I want to show you is what we all used to look like before saboteurs started messing with us. So if you're a lady, this is what you used to look like before saboteurs started messing with you. This is how we are born, full of possibility, full of positivity, full of awareness of how awesome we really are. Now, if you're a guy, this is you look like a variation of this. Do you think he knows how amazing he is? Every strand of his hair knows how unbelievable he is, how awesome life is, and what his potential is. We are born with emotional, energetic access to how awesome we are and our possibility for both happiness and creating good stuff in life. And then, by the way, I can't ever leave this without showing these. These two are my kids, my beautiful son Kian, my beautiful girl Tisa. They too, at this stage of their life, this is before saboteurs. This is before anybody has messed with them. So, and I guarantee you that if I had a picture of you 6 months old, a year old, you would be as vibrant, as powerfully in touch with your amazing beauty as a human being. But at some point, every single one of us starts losing the light. At some point, these faces begin to dim. This energy and joy begins to dim, and the reason is the saboteurs. Now, in my own case, it happened pretty quickly. In most cases, it takes longer, but here is my own case. Do you think this guy knows how amazing he is? He used to know. He was born knowing how awesome he is. By the way, adorable, right? Right? You agree? It's amazing what a little bit of hair does to you, or loss of it. My wife assures me that she thinks bald is cool, but I don't buy it. So basically, yes, this is only about 2 years old. And as you can see in this picture, something has happened to me already. And what had happened to me was the saboteurs. Now, saboteurs are not initially the bad guys. The reason we get them is that saboteurs are actually our agents of survival. And the reason I have the look that the saboteur brings you, and this is a dramatic look that the saboteur brings, is that I really needed my saboteurs to come and help me survive. Now, I'm going to tell you the story of how my saboteurs came into my life and helped me survive. You may not relate to it from a perspective that you may have had an easier childhood and all that, but I'm going to tell you how even happy childhood results in saboteurs. Basically, what happens is that as a child, we have a need to survive emotionally and a need to survive physically. And the saboteurs come in to help make sure that you survive both physically and emotionally. So in my case, I was born a happy kid, a very sensitive and adorable kid, as we have already established, but also a sensitive kid. And the problem was that I lived in a two-bedroom apartment in a ghetto with 4 siblings and my parents in poverty. But that wasn't the problem. The problem was that my father was a very angry and scary and violent man. And for a sensitive kid like me, that was pretty devastating, seeing what happened with me, with my mother, with the kids. So basically, life was not all that enjoyable. And the key thing was that I wasn't getting much love or attention from my parents. Now, I needed to emotionally survive, and here's the situation. There is no way that I could have admitted to myself that my parents were flawed. Imagine how terrifying it would have been for me to say, you know, Shirzad, you're out of luck. Your life is in the hands of imperfect parents. You realize how terrifying that is? It's almost like being under the sea, scuba diving or whatever, and then thinking that the thing that brings you air is broken and is gonna stop functioning any minute now. That's terrifying. My life was in the hands of my parents. I needed to keep them perfect. In order to keep them perfect, I needed this saboteur that began to come into my mind, which I later called it the judge saboteur. And what this judge saboteur said to help me survive was, hey buddy, your parents are actually perfect beings, and the reason these perfect people don't love you is because you are such a loser. You are completely unworthy of any love or attention. They are perfect, you are a loser. It sounds cruel, but actually it was extremely helpful to me surviving my childhood emotionally. It would have otherwise been far more terrifying. But notice that once this construct of the judge saboteur started telling me, Shirzad, you're a loser, there's something fundamentally wrong with you, it also started judging everybody else around me except for my parents and finding fault in everybody else instantly. I would see anybody and instantly I would find what's wrong with them. Why do you think that was necessary? Once again, the judge saboteur saying, well, Shirzad, you're a loser, but then don't worry, everybody else too is. Everybody else is also broken and screwed up. It allowed me to not be terrified by being the only loser in the world. Now, how conscious do you think I was of this construct happening in my mind? It was happening at this age. There's no way I remember the genesis of it. And most saboteurs start very early, so we are unconscious of them. So here I am growing up, and I'm a very ambitious person and become my teacher's pets and straight A student and all that stuff. And I have no idea that I have this strong judge saboteur. And then what happens that changes my life is that at Stanford Business School, not far from here, I was in an MBA class when I was a student there. And in this class, what we did was put people into groups of 12, and we would meet once a week in a group of 12 and sit in a circle, and we had to tell each other the honest truth about how we were really feeling about each other. And most of the people in my life I had fooled into not them realizing I didn't judge them or whatever. The problem with this group is after a while they get to know you. And so there is no hiding. So at one point, one of the people in the group turned to me and said, and his lips was shaking, his hand was shaking. He said, Shirzad, this is really hard for me to tell you, but I often feel harshly judged by you, and it really bothers me. So I turned to him and said, John, thank you so much for telling me this. This is very helpful feedback. In the back of my mind, I was thinking, well, of course you feel judged by me, you idiot. You're the biggest loser in this group. How else do you expect me to think of you? That's really what I was thinking. But then a second person, a third person, a fourth person said exactly the same thing. And believe it or not, I kept thinking, well, take a number, guys, the second biggest loser in the group, the third, the fourth, come on. It's amazing how this is lining up. Look at yourself in the mirror, stop blaming myself for your insecurities, all of that stuff. But then what changed my life is the fifth person who was sitting to my left. At this point, he got up in disgust and went and sat across the circle from me and said, Shirzad, I feel so disgusted by your inability to hear the truth about what people are telling you. I literally can no longer sit next to you. And at that point, finally, the facade of my judge saboteur was broken. And I finally saw, oh my God, they're right. I have this automatic habit of the mind where I judge everything instantly. I instantly find faults with others and myself. And it's something that it's just such an automatic habit, I never think about it. And that's the moment where I realized that I had this brutal judge saboteur. And of course, as you can imagine, that realization changed my life, because as I started looking into it, I also later realized, hey, I have a couple of other nasty guys in my head. I also had other saboteurs, and I did some research in this work and finally realized there are altogether 10 saboteurs, the judge being the master saboteur. I had a couple others, but then so do everybody else. That part I really loved, finding out that everybody else has saboteurs too. But at that moment, the terrifying realization was that I thought I was the only one who had the saboteur. So I want to, just in the interest of time, move a little faster and get into just talking about how the saboteurs are in these two different, there's a grid of these 9 saboteurs, and that the 2 dimensions are motivation, what the saboteur gets you, and the style with which that saboteur gets you that thing that you're looking for. And that results in this cast of characters, the controller, hyperachiever, restless, stickler, pleaser, and hypervigilant. and avoider victim hyper-rational. This is the nasty cast of characters that's running the show in many of our heads. The judge being the one that everybody has, then the question is which other saboteur do you have? And I have worked with hundreds of people. I have actually literally coached hundreds of CEOs and their executive teams. I have worked with people on the manufacturing floors. I have not yet found a population that is not significantly hampered by these saboteurs. This is the source of our quiet desperation in life and how we do not achieve a lot of our potential in the world. So there is an assessment at the end of actually at the end of this talk I'm going to give you, there is an assessment online that you can go and in 5 minutes you can get a bar chart of your saboteurs. And the reason I want you to do that is that one of the key ways that we want you to weaken your saboteur is this. If the saboteur is your internal enemy, what do we do with criminals? We create a wanted poster. And why do we create a wanted poster for criminals? So that we can catch them the moment they show up. So ultimately, you want to create a wanted poster for your saboteur. What's its name? What's its habits? What's its characteristics? What's its belief systems? And the assessment online is going to help you figure that out. Figure out what your judge's characteristics are and what other top saboteur that you have. And then what you do after that, one of the key ways to reduce the power of your saboteur over you is that every time, since you have done the wanted poster, when it shows up in your head, you can immediately recognize it. So all you need to do, one of the key things that you can do is when the thought shows up in your head, you just label that thought as saboteur and let it go instead of trusting it or pursuing it, because now you know it's your enemy. So just notice the difference between me saying, I am going to fail tomorrow, versus my pesky judge saboteur says I'm going to fail tomorrow. I mean, do you see the difference? Do you feel the difference? You take away the power, the credibility of these nasty characters in your head. The moment you label them, recognize them as not your friend, label them as they show up, and let go. And that gets us, so that's how you weaken your saboteur. In the book, there are other strategies for how to weaken your saboteurs. The second strategy, remember the first strategy was weaken your saboteurs. The second strategy is, okay, if you can weaken the bad guy, but you can also strengthen the good guy or gal inside of you, and that's your sage. Now, one of the key things about the sage is the sage perspective. And the sage perspective is a radical departure from how your saboteurs have you deal with life's challenges and difficulties. And here's the sage perspective. Every outcome or circumstance can be turned into a gift and opportunity. Every outcome or circumstance can be turned into a gift and opportunity. And a key way to strengthen your sage is to actually begin to embrace that perspective. Now, to help you embrace that perspective, I want to share with you a story and also share with you a little bit of an experiment somebody did to prove this hypothesis. So first, the story, and it's a story that comes from Taoist China. And it's a Stallion Story, where it's the story of a farmer who lives on a farm with his stallion. And by the way, before I'm telling you the story, let me ask you the question. If you have a prized possession in your life and your most important prized possession gets stolen, do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? Most of you would say, with the normal mind, says, of course that's a bad thing. What kind of stupid question is that? If a loved one falls down and breaks their leg, is it a good thing or a bad thing? Once again, it's a stupid question. Of course it's a bad thing. And basically the sage says nonsense to that. The sage says it's a gift and opportunity. And that's what the Stallion Story is about. So this farmer lives on a farm, and he has a prized possession, a stallion. He enters the stallion into a competition in a nearby village, and the stallion wins first prize. His neighbors come to congratulate him, and the farmer says, who knows what's good and what's bad, which is a very puzzling response. The thieves in the neighborhood have found out that the stallion has won first prize, it's more precious, so they come and steal the stallion. The neighbors come to bring condolences. Once again, the farmer says, well, who knows what's good and what's bad? Again, a very puzzling response. Another couple of weeks pass, and this stallion, who's very free-spirited, he runs away from his captors, finds his way back to the farmer's farm, and has befriended all these beautiful wild mirrors and comes to the farm with all these precious wild mirrors in addition to himself. The neighbors come to bring their congratulations. Once again, the farmer says, who knows what is good and what is bad? Another week or so passes, and the farmer's teenage son is riding one of these wild mirrors to tame it, and he's thrown to the ground and breaks his leg. The neighbors come to bring their condolences, and once again the farmer says, who knows what is good and what is bad? Another week or so passes. By the way, by now you have noticed this village is a very eventful village. Like every week something monumental happens. I like to live in that village. It's exciting. So another week or so passes. A war has broken in the area. The imperial army is coming to every village to conscript able-bodied adults, and they have to bypass his son, the farmer's son, because he has a broken leg. By this time in the story, the neighbors have gotten the picture, right? They don't even bother to come and bring their congratulations because they know what the farmer is going to say. What is the farmer going to say? Who knows what is good and what is bad? Now, there is one thing about this story that's different from our sage. Right? In this story, the farmer miraculously passively waits for the bad thing to turn into a good thing. Now, our sage is very active. Our sage says, I can and I shall turn this bad thing into a gift and opportunity. So please, if you miss your numbers for the quarter, do not go to your manager and says, boss, I have missed all my numbers, but who knows what is good and what is bad? Don't do that. Say, I have made mistakes here, but I know how to turn it into a gift and opportunity. And once you do the, once you assume the sage perspective of everything can be turned into gift and opportunity, your brain shifts to the region of the brain, that's your positive intelligence brain. That brain is far more capable of being resourceful. And one of the most powerful, inspiring examples that a researcher by the name of Richard Wiseman did to prove this point is that he actually brought some study subjects that were running on low positive intelligence. In his terms, they felt unlucky and things like that, versus another group that runs on high positive intelligence who were feeling lucky and optimistic and that kind of thing. He gave both groups this challenge that said, there's this newspaper that I've created. The newspaper had many, many pages. Find out how many pictures are in this newspaper as quickly as you can, and you get a reward if you find the right number really fast. The first group that was running on low positive intelligence, they paged through every page of the newspaper really painstakingly, counted all the pictures, and proudly announced within about 2 minutes on average, they said, hey, there are 43 pictures on this newspaper. They felt very proud of themselves and that they had performed and got the right number. Here's the interesting challenge. The second group, who were running more on high positive intelligence, they came back within 10 seconds and gave the right answer. And you know why and how? They saw that on the second page of the newspaper, the entire half of the newspaper, in 2-inch high letters, said, stop counting. There are 43 pictures in this newspaper. That's how a brain that's running on positive intelligence region operates. It sees opportunities. It sees the panoramic view. It's not tunnel visioned. The question I have for you is, how many of you are having your life be difficult and your work be difficult because your saboteurs are telling you it's just so? Because the part of your brain that is used in the no pain, no gain, used to life being difficult and challenges being stressful, is running you, versus the part that can figure out on second page the answer is right there. The easy answer is right in front of your nose. The sage perspective is not a matter of spiritual leap of faith. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe in the sage perspective, your brain shifts into the region that will be able to actually turn whatever the challenge, difficulty, failure, even your failures and mistakes, and turns them actively into gifts and opportunities. It's not a matter of faith. It's a matter of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Your saboteurs are a self-fulfilling prophecy. So is your sage. And once you actually activate the sage, with this perspective, you actually get automatic access, because of that part of your brain, to 5 powerful sage powers. And what I do in the book is show you that every life challenge or every work challenge can be handled by a combination of these 5 powers, that you have it inside of you. If you shift to that region, you will tap into it, and you'll be able to handle all your challenges without ever resorting to things that make you anxious and negative. And these 5 powers are empathize. Rather than beating yourself up and beating other people up when difficulties happen, can you be compassionate with yourself? You have access to that in positive intelligence brain. Explore. Can you be a fascinated anthropologist with great excitement, figure out what's going wrong rather than with shame or blame or difficulty or anxiety? Innovate. Can you be truly out of the box? The positive intelligence brain is wired for creativity. The survival brain is not a very creative brain. It gets stuck in the box. If you have shifted yourself, you have access to far more creativity. Navigate. When you generate lots of options, can you navigate your path and figure the option that's most aligned with your deeper sense of purpose and meaning, the part where your song lives? That's how you end up singing your true song in the world. And finally, activate. And with activate, the way I describe it is like the Jedi activate. When the Jedi is being attacked by lots of enemies at the same time, the Jedi takes action with complete focus and complete peace. There is no anger, there is no stress, there is nothing. There's just pure action. Can you move into action with the clarity and calm and focus of a Jedi? That's what, again, your positive intelligence brain gets you. Survival brain has you take action with all this drama and all this waste of energy, emotional and mental energy, so your action is not going to be as impactful. And again, the book is all about how different people, real-life leaders, CEOs that I've coached, have used these 5 powers to achieve both greater happiness and also effectiveness. And that brings us finally to the last of the 3 strategies, which is the strengthen the PQ brain region. This one is about going right to the heart of the matter. How do you make sure you build a brain muscle that automatically has you be much more in the positive intelligence region of your brain rather than the survival brain? The first 2 strategies were at the psychological level. This strategy is at the neurological level. So those brain regions that I talked about, the ancient way of making sure you shift to that brain region, what do you think the ancient way has been? Meditation. So meditation has been the ancient way, proven beyond any doubt now by researchers that it has a profound, lasting impact if you regularly meditate. Here's the problem. About 10 years ago, I started requiring every one of my CEO clients to do 20 minutes of meditation a day, or anybody who wanted to be my client. Everybody promised. Not a single person said no. What percentage of them do you think actually did it? About 10%. The problem with meditation, I found, is that it's not simple and actionable for a vast majority of people. It's not a tool that works, unfortunately. Even though if you use the tool, it's a very profound tool. So I went back to the functional MRI and the studies and tried to find another way where we can activate that region of the brain without it being such a high bar. And what that way is what I call a PQ rep, a positive intelligence, PQ standing for positive intelligence. You need to get about 100 PQ reps a day and what a PQ rep is, it's 10 seconds of bringing your full attention, as much as you can, to any of your physical sensations. And it's something you can do any minute of any day in the middle of anything that you're doing. For example, right this moment, begin to feel the weight of your whole body on your butt. You have been sitting on your butt, but have you been aware of your butt? No, you haven't. You've been in your head. So become aware of your butt right now for the next 10 seconds. And that will activate the region of your brain that ends up building your positive intelligence capabilities. Or it can be any sensations. Rub 2 fingertips against each other with such exquisite attention that you can feel the fingertip ridges on both fingers. If you do that for 10 seconds, you'll be able to actually activate that part of the brain. The natural, the most common way, the next few breaths, feel the rising and falling of your chest or stomach with your next few breaths. More fun ways, even when you're not in the middle of a meeting, next time you have lunch, can you, for God's sake, just a few bites, a few bitefuls, can you actually exquisitely taste the amazing taste of what you have put in your mouth? Can you close your eyes for 10 seconds and really feel what it is you have put in your mouth? When you're taking a shower, can you feel the water on your skin? Can you hear the sound of the water? When you're hugging your loved one, this is my favorite. Next time you're hugging your loved one, can you hold on for 10 seconds, long enough to actually feel their heartbeat or feel their breathing? It will have an impact on your relationship. So what I have done, hopefully, with this third strategy is, again, make it simple and actionable. Can you get a few PQ reps a day, an hour, so that it builds up to about 100? I have shown you that you just got 3 PQ, 3 or 4 right now sitting here. You can get there. The question is, will you? One of the other final insights I want to share with you about this third strategy is the following. One of my biggest mistakes through many years of trying to transform myself into a much happier person, a more capable person, was the lie of the insight model. The lie of the insight model is, if only I read the right book, if only I get the right insight and get the answers, I'm going to be transformed. The lie there is that actually in reality, personal transformation is more of a fitness model. You would never go to a workshop on physical fitness, come back and say, honey, I'm fit for life. I figured it out. You will never do that. You'll say, I'm motivated to go to the gym every day, but then you got to go to the gym every day. My work has been, because these are muscles, these are brain muscles that need to be developed and maintained. My job has been show you how fun and easy it can be. Your job is, do you care enough for an orbital shift to much higher level of sustained happiness and effectiveness? Do you care enough to put as much attention on it as you did in learning how to play golf or tennis or all sorts of other things you do every day? So I'd like to begin to wrap up by basically pointing you to positiveintelligence.com. It's where you can find a free 5-minute saboteur assessment to figure out a bar chart of your top saboteurs. In a couple of minutes, you get an assessment of your positive intelligence. What is your PQ score? So how are you doing? And then keep track of your progress. And please send me emails on your progress, because I love to know what this work is doing in the world. The dream that I have is the following. I believe by figuring out the root level of what creates much higher happiness and productivity, that we now finally, after all these centuries, can create a world where in 20, 30, 40 years, we'll basically be reading Thoreau's haunting and heartbreaking quote and say, it used to be like that. And the dream will come alive really when we finally begin to teach our children this. Imagine how insane it is that we teach our kids literature and history and math and everything, except we don't teach them probably the most important thing, which is mastery over their own mind. The science and technology of happiness and highest performance. Why do we not teach this stuff? So help me make sure in 20, 30 years we are teaching this in every high school. Imagine the kind of world we're going to build if we do that. And one final thing I want to say about that, if you want to spread a fire, you need to possess the fire yourself. You cannot spread that fire unless you have lit the fire inside your own heart and mind. Please light it. You're worth it. You deserve a lot more happiness and peace of heart, peace of mind. You deserve a lot more effectiveness in reaching your true potential in the world. And this, hopefully, I've shown you a way to do that. For final sense of how universal this is, just want to show you this last slide. This is my little girl, Tisa. I'd missed her a lot after a week of being on a trip. She hugged me, and this is a spontaneous kiss that we had. Somebody took a picture. But I'm just showing you this final thing because I want to show you how universal the saboteur phenomenon is. She's a real angel, right, in this picture. And what I want to show you is her demon. She's an incredible demon inside of her. She had created this little 5.5 by 11 thing for me and my wife, saying, I love you, mommy and daddy. And we just loved it so much, we put it on the bedroom door in our bedroom. So then once she got it, she wanted to do something, and I held really hard boundaries with her, and she was really upset with me and went away. And a few hours later, I was passing the corridor and past the door to my bedroom, and this is what I saw. So not only had she crossed out daddy, But to make sure I got the message, she put no up there. So she has a little demon inside of her, a saboteur. I told her, it had hurt my feelings or whatever. I helped her shift to the sage mode. And the next day, she actually said to me, Daddy, I have a surprise for you. Close your eyes. She held my hand, brought me to the front of the bedroom. This is what she had done. She had actually cut out the bottom, replaced it with the new daddy. And here's what I said to you before is every challenge and problem is a gift and opportunity. Look, Daddy is now bigger than Mommy. Daddy is bigger than Mommy. The whole thing just worked out great. This stuff works. Please go do it. And thank you for your time. I'll stay here for your questions. Thank you. Thank you.